So I think at this point we can bring in everyone, Terry and Lazar as well. Oh, what a wonderful pleasure it is to see you back here. I almost missed you. Just a little. All right. Well, I do have a couple of questions. I think I want to kind of just start in by posing the question of life. The question of life to me. So we've been doing web performance now for a while, for a couple of decades, and we've been going through very different phases. Right. I remember that vividly when we actually started getting into the board with client-side rendering, we all got very excited, but then we all got very worried about performance. And then we kind of pulled back and we figured a way to do something else. And then we cannot rely on CSR alone. So we need to do SSR, and then we need to do static site generator. And we need to do this and that and this and that. And we get to the point where we are now. So I'm just wondering what your take is in general, where we're going with performance. Do you feel like we are getting to a place where a lot of websites will be fast or getting significantly faster because we have all the wonderful frameworks in the world and they're heavily optimized, and with React Server components and also with HTMX and whatnot? Or, or is it like the circle of life where the faster things are, the more people use stuff and do things with it, and then the more polluted everything gets? Are we ever going to resolve this chaos in the world? Anybody wants to start? I can almost feel like Lazar is on fire. Bring it on.
All right, let's start that. Yeah, I mean, good point with the how things get faster and we abuse that. We add a bunch of stuff and
Well,
then they
we
get
don't.
slower.
Hold on. No, we don't. They do, right? They do.
They
We
do,
don't.
yes. Well, we only do high performance stuff,
Absolutely,
anyways.
of
Yeah,
course.
but yeah, I mean, looking at the state of JS, like results the amount of was it state of JS? I think it was state of JS. Yeah, and like the HTTP archive, the amount of bundle size increases each year. So we are shipping more code to the browser, but then also devices get faster and internet speeds hopefully get fast, become faster. So I want to see faster websites in the future as well. But I think we are way over the line where we need to, actually be.
Mm. So I think that Lazar is still being optimistic, given that it's 2024. That gives me hope as well. Terry, what about you? What do you think? Are we getting better?
I think I'm a
Actually,
little more pessimistic.
yes.
I mean, I agree. I think yes, devices are getting faster. I was going to bring that up, but I think our devices, like in the developed world, like are getting faster. But a lot of more people are coming online. People with lower end devices, like just kind of the overall population on the internet is also growing. A lot of those newcomers are coming with worse connections, worse devices, and so performance is still kind of really bad for those visitors. So I'm kind of less optimistic.
So I guess that at this point, then Jody has to be the judge between the
I know all.
Yes, exactly.
Well, the way that I see it is that there are people entering this field every single day, and the knowledge that they are absorbing is so different even to what we learned, like, however many years ago. Let's just say we're all very, very young, and it was quite recently. And so I feel like what's going to end up happening is that there will be, I would say, improvement, let's just say, in certain clicks of groups of people. Like the people that we're talking amongst here obviously will have the most performant websites no matter what tools you're using. They will be testing tools. But there are also people who, I think I heard the stat not so long ago from Tammy Everts about how there's maybe 60% of people who's uploading code before they've actually reviewed it directly by asking ChatGPT in terms of writing this code. So that naturally, in my opinion, cannot be performative and probably causes a bunch of other problems. So it's fast in terms of code generation, but it's terribly slow in terms of the website overall. So all to say, I've probably not answered your question, but I do think that it's more that if we are to improve the overall performance of websites, is we kind of do have to speak in very specific cliques, very specific subsets of people in order to kind of make an assessment.
Maybe actually coming back to the state of things of where we are right now. And of course, many of us are using React or using kind of building on top of React at this point. And I think that many of us have been struggling, especially with the rise of INP becoming core of Vital, just seeing, we're having a bit of an issue there, but we don't know how to fix that. The JavaScript execution is just taking time. So, and I think in many ways, when we're looking at, again, React server components, they can definitely help. But I'm wondering, maybe that's a question for you, Lazar, at this point. So if you, let's say, wanted to migrate and move from the code base that you have towards using, like, making the best out of React server components, what would be the process there? Will it be, do we need to kind of rebuild from scratch? Can we have a Frankenstein model, some parts kind of starting migrating some parts? How would it all fit together? What would be a nice approach to this? Makes sense.
Yeah, for example, if you're already using a framework that supports RSCs, whether that's, I think it's at this point, it's Next.js, Gatsby, or Redwood.js, I think you can start to implement RSCs in a more like streamlined way. You don't need to refactor the whole app from scratch at the very first day. You can do that gradually. But if you're not using any of those frameworks that can provide you the ability to do RSCs, it's gonna be hard. I know there's a way to do it with a regular Express server, and Kenzie Dodds posted a guide on how to achieve RSCs without any frameworks, but it's not as easy and straightforward.
Okay, that's good to know. A question maybe for Terry, and then probably also to Jody, which would be related to that. I'm curious. I mean, I remember vividly there was maybe like 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, there was a couple of articles on Etsy blog around performance, and I really remember those articles for some. I don't even know why they stuck with me for some time, but they did, and I thought, oh, this is really nice. They have a really nice Etsy like performance team. That's pretty impressive. So what I'm curious about actually is, how do you orchestrate performance? Meaning, how do you actually test? Like, do you have like, for example, every time you I don't know, create a new pull request, does it need to go through the performance check? Do you actually have some sort of performance session, performance monitoring tools, performance testing, and also maybe a more specific question that actually came up in a couple of conversations I had recently. So we actually still, many of us still believe that we need to test on Moto G4, because for a long time Google has been claiming that this is the device, this is the device, this is the representative device to test on. But it seems like it's a very old device today. So maybe you could share a bit of a landscape about how this, testing and the kind of the performance work is actually happening inside Etsy.
Sure. So I feel like I can mostly speak to Etsy and kind of what works for us. I don't know if
Sure,
I feel like I have the authority to speak for like overall, but I'll tell you what has worked for us as far as like testing performance goes. It's still something that we're actively working out and thinking about. Like, we do have an established performance team, but we're pretty small. And I think the performance team that published those articles like 5-10 years ago was like shut down and then kind of reestablished a few years later. So it's not like we've been continuously around. There's always some turmoil and reorging going on. But I would say in general, we tend to rely on real user data, like RUM data, more so than kind of synthetic data that you might gather automatically, like on every pull request or something. I think that has worked or that I've heard of that working for other companies, but I think there are technical complications for us. Like, I think it's very difficult for us to approximate like a production like environment based on code in development. So that makes it more difficult. So we just kind of generally encourage teams to push their code to production behind a feature flag. I'm not sure if a feature flag is like an interesting word term, but just kind of gate it in the code. Yep. Make it so that we can test it. We can use synthetic tools like, web page test on it while it's in production before it goes out to real users. And just kind of do some checks then. And, if we need to make follow-up kind of changes to production to fix any glaring errors at that stage. So there's that. And we're also, at least recently, we've been focusing more on like developer education and kind of built-in tooling to kind of help engineers before they even get to the PR stage or before they get to production. This is including, things like giving, like Etsy is a large company. There's kind of hundreds of engineers who work here. So like we're giving talks, we're kind of reaching out, we're embedding with different teams. These are kind of like the soft skills or like kind of education, knowledge sharing, kind of drumming up interest. And we're also building in some tooling for like common performance, like no-nos that we see, making it to production a lot, making it to our users. Things like linting or linting on the code level, and also one of our team members is building out like when we load our developer interface in the browser, like doing some automated testing there to detect like, are there images that are below the fold that should be lazy loaded but aren't, like things like that. So we're always trying to drum up new ways to like reach out to the other engineers and make sure that they're building things performantly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's interesting to see. I'll have more in just a moment, but I also have one for Jody, and I'm just curious. I think this is all about me. I think it's just I'm just really, really curious. I'm sure there are some great questions.
We're
in
here
the
for
chat.
you.
But I'll get to a question, Imar MX, in just a second. So, do you see, Jody, like if you look at the landscape of, I don't know, websites, web applications, products, digital products built in China, do you see that there is still just a lot built on React, a lot built on Vue, or is it just a very different front-end landscape altogether compared to what we might be used to, I don't know, in Western world? Is it just, well, basically the question is it really the wild west of JavaScript and CSS or not?
It's interesting that you talk about specific languages, but I actually might reframe it where some people altogether don't care about websites, which I find endlessly fascinating when it comes to China, is that they're not even discussing the languages that are being used, is whether or not to even have a website at all. And I think that's actually why it's more of a wild, wild west, because you might actually, so one perfect example is, so in China, there are a bunch of different platforms, right? If you're selling e-commerce, if you're a luxury product, there's something called Tmall that a lot of people will pitch in and use as a marketplace. Tmall has become, I would say, restrictively expensive, even for some of the best companies out there. I work with a lot of luxury companies in terms of consulting and things like that, and they say that Tmall is becoming restrictive even for the top ones coming from the UK, US. And so all of a sudden they're now talking about websites. And for them, I don't actually think they're even talking about the languages. I myself, I'm not going to compete the languages because I don't think that's my expertise there. But what I will say is that they're discussing whether or not to even have a website at all. And if so, what functionality does that website need? I don't think the language is even the question at hand. Which,
well, that's fascinating. So basically it's just about being present on, let's say, WeChat or not, or in some way.
Correct. And I think it's interesting because they're going through a phase where they've gone away from the website, and now having to go back to the website for a lot of people is very difficult because these marketplaces are restrictive. You still need the website. Search is still very big. Baidu search, equivalent of Google search in China, you still need to be relevant there. WeChat, if you're sending a link through WeChat, it's probably a website link. And if the website link doesn't work, you end up with a problem there as well.
True.
And so it's kind of going through this wave of, oh, no, we go through these walled gardens. It's like going through Facebook and Instagram. We only need that to know. Now we need our website to be important again. So I think this will be a very interesting space to watch. And if anything, the knowledge that you guys have will be incredibly important in terms of helping these large companies make that decision.
Oh, that's so interesting. There's also a question that came in the chat for Terry. The question came from Anat. Terry, what are, for example, no-nos that you alert on in code reviews, if that applies?
Yes. So yeah, performance, very complicated topic. There are a lot of like subtle degradations that my team has to kind of track down by hand. But there are certain things that we can also kind of more or less easily lint against. This is an example that I don't think applies that broadly, but like in the past, our engineers would like upload custom site assets or images, like for a banner or whatever on the site. And instead of routing them through our CDNs, which could then add on, caching and other performance optimizations like resizing, they would just kind of embed on our site directly like the S3 image from our AWS bucket. So that is something that we've successfully linted against. That is no longer a problem on our site. Tiny things like, well, I mean, this isn't. Oh, okay. Another recent example from like a week or two ago. Again, like a very small problem, but still, it all adds up. We noticed, like, we do not use React at Etsy. We're like large. We're kind of a big company. We're relatively old, so change comes pretty slowly. We have a few kind of isolated islands of React, but most of our front end is written not directly in HTML, but in an HTML templating language called Mustache. And we noticed that there are two different ways of doing comments in those templates. One kind of native HTML comments that have kind of like greater than, less than, and dash dash, and one kind of another version of comments that gets stripped away when that Mustache file gets converted into HTML. And so we noticed a lot of pages had bloat from comments that were written as native HTML comments that could have been written as the other kind of comment and then been stripped away and kind of reduce our page size. So we wrote some linting to prevent any new additions of those. I think we're slowly rolling that out. So like those are both really small, simple examples. And they're pretty Etsy specific, but like I'd say just look for kind of tiny opportunities like that where you can if you're a performance engineer like me, kind of make your life easier and save your time for like tackling bigger, harder to find and harder to lint against challenges.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So thanks so much, Terry. I think also I have a question, like probably like one of the final questions to Lazar. At this point, I just have to ask it. I'm just curious. Lazar, do you know any, I don't know, application monitoring software that you're using to monitor your application?
Oh yeah, I use one. It's really good. It's called Sentry.
So you basically use Sentry for Sentry.
Yeah.
Maybe you could also kind of shed a little bit of light about how your performance team works and like what is happening behind the scenes, very similar to what Terry was suggesting or was telling us about Etsy.
Yeah, so we're really big on dogfooding. We use Sentry to monitor the performance of Sentry while we're developing Sentry.
Before we go there, do we do this like? Can we go Inception there?
Okay,
like,
yeah.
Can we use a software monitoring tool to monitor the software monitoring tool of Sentry? Can we do that? No, that would make no sense.
We use Sentry to monitor Sentry, right? So we use a software monitoring tool to monitor how us.
There's only 2 levels. I want to go broader, so that's probably not. But I'm just kidding.
Yeah, there's like 2 levels. Yeah, but yeah, we're big on dogfooding. We use Sentry while working on Sentry. And we are like just as surprised with the results as everyone else in the web performance ecosystem is. So, yeah.
But also, when you're looking at, let's say, specifically the web performance, that you are providing, the product is providing, what is kind of the like the testing lab maybe that you have, or any kind of performance process that you have, like to track things, to obviously to monitor things, but also to kind of fix bugs and so on. How big is the team, by the way, as well? Just maybe you could provide a bit of insight about how you actually do your work day to day.
Yeah. So there are multiple teams working on multiple parts of the Sentry, the whole Sentry as a product. So each of those teams have their own separate space in for example in GitHub. And Sentry being an open source, it's all out in the open. So bug reports happen on GitHub as issues. The engineers, while working on them, they communicate through the actual issues on GitHub. And of course we do have tests. We use CodeCough, which is another Sentry product, to monitor the coverage of our tests and how much of the code we have covered with tests. But it's basically how things work. It's all out in the open. It's all on GitHub.
Okay, so like all the good stuff. Then let's see. That's nice to hear. I'm also wondering, just in general, maybe that's also kind of the final question that we would wrap up as well. So I always like to ask this question in the end because it can, you never know who's going to watch this maybe 5, maybe 10 years later. But imagine that you were sending a message to your future self, looking and watching this maybe 5, 10 years from now. Maybe let's make it big, like let's say 7.5. That's just a good compromise in between. So what would you love to be resolved in the world of performance 7.5 years from now? Do you think that we should be getting a particular feature that we all have been waiting for? Do we need HTTP 7 at this point? I don't know. What do you have, like something on your wish list? What you always wish the platform had? Okay, so thank you so much, Amanda, by the way, for typing it all in and really actually making 7.5 years out of that. Do you have anything on your agenda or on your wish list of what you really think web performance community should have, or maybe web as a platform should have? Maybe we should start with, I don't know, anybody wants to take a lead? Terry?
Oh, I'll go. Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe just because it's fresh in my mind, having given this talk, an hour or two ago. But I think one thing that's sorely missing from performance metrics is that that single page app component. Like I was talking about, there's a huge gap. Like single page apps are not going away, client side, server side, what have you. But I feel like more and more of web development is going in that direction, and at least the common kind of standard performance metrics haven't really kept up. The exciting thing is Google is kind of on the forefront for a lot of performance metric stuff that they have an origin trial. I think it is wrapping up soon, and they're going to run another one, but they are actively working on the problem. I think I mentioned that. So I'm hopeful that 7.5 years from now to the day, we'll just be in a state where, just like for regular hard navigation, you'll just kind of zip around your site, soft navigating, and kind of you'll have all the readily available performance metrics that you would get from hard navigation. That's my dream.
That's fantastic. That sounds great. I think FRIEDMAN in the chat has another dream. The dream is all about realistic client expectations. Well, maybe 7.5 years from now we will be there. Maybe a little bit sooner than that. I'm not quite sure. Well, maybe Lazar?
I would say let's raise the bar when it comes to the device performance, like entry device performance. Because if we are limited from the bottom with low-end devices, then we who live in a bubble, I don't care. I have high-speed internet. I'm running on a MacBook, etc. I don't have problems. But if we're talking about performance in the world, then we're usually, the problems come from the lower quality of devices. So I would love to see the low end of device quality, be more up, be better, be more performant.
Excellent. So I think we have a really important optimism area, and then we have a pessimism area, and then it's nice. No, I'm just joking here. So that's really nice to see. Jody, do you dream about the world without Chinese firewall?
Well, of course I do. I live in Hong Kong, which actually does benefit from the internet, essentially like the rest of the world. And I grew up in the US, spent time in Paris. So my upbringing naturally is someone who's cross-border. So I do think realizing client expectation, that was almost going to be something that I would have gone with. But actually, I would have loved that in, let's just say in 7.5 years. It sounds like a world peace statement, but I feel like the performance community is incredibly open, great at sharing, best practices, very communicative. I just wish that could translate in terms of all the other elements that are needed to make performance work. So, let's just talk about the CMS providers out there, the tools out there, the different platforms out there, plugins, et cetera. And I feel like that communication in terms of best practices, transparency, leveling each other up is not there. And I just would really wish that as humans, we can improve, and as platforms, we can improve in terms of our communication and ability to just talk across the board, because it's a group effort in terms of making performance work.
Yep, that sounds like a wonderful ending of a wonderful conversation. Well, with this, thank you so much, Terry, Jody, and Lazar for joining us in this little adventure of ours. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us as well. Maybe just if you feel like it, just a final parting word of wisdom to yourself, sending out to the future yourself, watching this 7.5 years from now, maybe just one sentence each. Again, don't forget, it's like 7.5 years from now, you're going to rewatch this, and I'm going to set up a calendar invite to send you away, right? To see where we are 7.5 years from now. That'll be very curious. So I think, Lazar, you have just one sentence. Anything?
Ship less code.
All right, here we go. We've got that covered. Jody?
Let's do this in person.
Oh, okay, here we go. Like 7.5 years from now, we're going to do this in person then. Terry?
Oh, I'm blanking. I mean, I feel like my personal mantra is like keep it simple. So
right.
hopefully that will still come in handy 7 years from now.
That absolutely works. I think this is probably going to be still working and be very much useful 7.5 years from now. I also want to challenge Lazar to play on a guitar 7.5 years from now, which is in the back of the room. That would be very exciting.
Well, by the way, I am a singer-songwriter, so maybe Lazar and I should work together on something.
Oh, maybe
we already have a band. There we go.
Terry, do you think like you have impeccable singing skills?
No, I can clap and bob my head.
Fantastic.
I can join this band.
I think that will work. I mean, this is what we signed up for 7.5 years from now. Just for the record, today is 2024, and 7.5 years from now would be still 2031, probably around December time. So please don't keep your calendars reserved and blocked for this special event of a lifetime. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining in. Dear audience, dear friends joining in, thank you so much for joining as well.